There's a lot of time is spent in terms of understanding, explaining whether it be from within a unit that's doing these trials or from an investigator, understanding, what that trial might mean. And you have to know that there might be a randomized trial where some people might get placebo and other people get drug. Again, you're blind, you need to know to ask this question. Like, if I do a randomized trial, am I going to get the drug at the end of it? What is the approach of this trial? What can you tell me about the medication? And so there's just a lot that's involved in communicating exactly what's expected. It's a huge commitment to decide to do a trial because it's not like usually one time. You have to really keep going back for visits. What I will say is that it's an opportunity to really develop a closer working relationship with the investigator and their staff. And so for some people, they find it really helpful to be able to have a dialogue and have ongoing access to specialists. I hear a lot of the frustration here about who do you talk to, who's going to pay attention. Well, you're in a trial, you have to be paid attention to because if there's a problem, we need to know about it. So it is kind of a different engagement, a different environment. And then going through the trial, what we all hope for is coming out with a successful treatment that's going to improve what we're doing. And we already heard about treatment today, that there have been some successes in lupus, which is really exciting because that's how we're going to get to a point where we won't have to use steroids and where we can control some of the side effects. And without trials, we'll never get approvals to be able to access those medications. Okay. Dr. Brady, anything to add?
Yeah, so when I get, usually I get like an email from someone related to a pharmaceutical company and they'll send me information on this trial entails, but it includes all the preclinical data about the treatment, any of the side effects. So we do get a lot of information about the drug that we would be using in the trial, including any possible side effects. And then you have what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. These are aspects of a patient that say, yes, you can participate in the trial, or no. For instance, if you were on dialysis, probably you're not going to be in a trial to look at kidney disease because there's not much chance of getting better. So I usually look over those things, and sometimes I'll say, like, this trial's not for our office because I just don't think we're going to be able to recruit patients. It could come down to that. Either they've made it so strict that it's just going to be impossible to recruit. The other thing is, as a participant in a trial, as a patient, you sign a consent. And I think it's important, for you to understand that the consent is not like a contract. So at any point, even 5 seconds after you sign it, you could decide, I don't want to participate in the trial. And so that's important that you still are in control of your body. And this sometimes happens because a patient gets sick or they decide it's too, there are a lot of visits involved. Maybe they decide it's too much for them. Whatever the reason, you don't even have to give a reason. If you decide you don't want to participate in the trial, that's your decision. And if it was one of my patients, I would say, well, I'll see you in a month, a regular follow-up visit, and we just go back to that. So I think that's important to realize you're signing a consent that you agree to participate in the trial, but it's not like a binding contract.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Lawrence. You know me? Remember me?
Not off the top of my head. I'm old though, so I forget.
I go to Temple Rheumatology.
Oh, but you might see one of the other doctors?
Like Bernie and them.
Oh.
I was with Carricchio.
I've probably seen you walking, yeah.
Oh, Marissa knows me.
Yeah, okay.
So Nick, just kind of talking about the stigma. Many folks that I've talked to have said, they have this fear of being a test subject or a guinea pig. And just, can you speak to that as a person who has participated in trials?
Yes. I can understand why people might feel that way, but it's kind of like what the doctor was saying, like really understanding what the trial is, what are they trying to accomplish, who are they, testing, what is their goal of it, and like really trying to understand it so you don't feel that way. And just understanding like how important participation, especially of people of color, in these clinical trials are, and like that really should be the point for all of us, is like your participation could make the difference between if a drug gets approved or not. So I feel like trying to look at it that lens and then making yourself more comfortable with the actual trial does help.
Oh, so we'll do questions at the end. So just write that down so you don't forget it.
Oh, no, I'm already.
Okay. Yeah, we will have time for questions at the end. So also, Nikki, just thinking about that, why also do you think people are hesitant? Like we kind of talked about stigmas. What other things do you think cause those of us living with lupus to not want to participate in a trial?
Well, we can't talk about clinical trials without talking about the historical aspects of it. So obviously that's always the elephant in the room and something we have to discuss, something that doctors need to understand and always understand that that's in the forefront of a lot of patients' mind. But also I think just not knowing anybody that has done clinical trials. So I think that's why I'm up here speaking, but I encourage any of you who have participated in clinical trials to talk about it with other folks, peers. I do that. I'm a support group leader, so we try to do that as often as we can, but just talking to people like, hey, this medication worked for me, there's something out in the market there, I know nothing has been working for you, maybe you should try to get involved in this trial. Because I think people are more receptive to wanting to participate in a clinical trial if they know someone that actually did it and someone that's living with lupus in particular.
Thank you.
I'd like to add
go
something
ahead.
to that. So, you know, trying to attract people that aren't white is always difficult. I can tell you, as a rheumatologist, there must be 500 clinical trials since 2000 in rheumatoid arthritis. I'm guessing it's like 98% whites. So whenever I go to these meetings, I ask, well, how does the medicine work in people who aren't white? Well, we don't really know because that's the trials. And a lot of times these trials are from like Eastern Europe and other places where they don't have, you know, the kind of minorities we have here. And in rheumatoid arthritis, maybe it's not that important, I don't know, but in lupus, it certainly is because there is a difference in the disease. You know, if you compare different, ethnic groups. So that, it's very important. And a lot of the early lupus trials tended to be a lot of white people. And so it was very hard to take that data and, like, I practice at Temple, like, how does it really apply to my patient population? It's very difficult to know that. So that is, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. That's huge.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, something like 42% of people with lupus are, African American, Black, and only about 12 or 14% in trials. And there was actually a situation where one of the drugs that's approved, the FDA questioned, well, there were so few African Americans in this trial that you have to go and do a separate trial. And they had trouble recruiting for that trial. And so, it really, that's a big problem because then the question is, well, does this drug work the same?
Correct. So that kind of leads into my next question. When we do these clinical trials, how do we know that they're going to work for, just look at this room. How do we know that this is who these drugs are going to work for? So you kind of talked a little bit about that, like we have to recruit. So there was a drug that you were speaking about, I don't know, people who have taken Benlysta. This drug did come out, it was the first drug approved for lupus, if any of you have ever taken that. But did you know that it actually wasn't approved for African Americans? So that's what Dr. Worth was speaking about, is that this drug came to market, but it wasn't actually for everyone. So like Nikki was saying, this is why we need everybody to participate in trials. So when we get these new drugs out and they're recruiting, how do we know that they're going to really work for, the majority of folks that are living with lupus? I don't know if you have an
That's
answer to that
why we
one.
do the trials. I mean, usually the trials that, the results get a drug approved are what we call phase 3. So they usually recruit a large number of patients, usually multinational, because any one site, it's going to be hard to recruit more than 2 or 3 patients, just going through all the hurdles to get patients enrolled. And so it just takes a while to do the study, but they've already had phase 1, which is more looking at safety, And they do look at efficacy, but it's making sure that nothing goes wrong. And then the phase 2 is usually like looking at the dose, maybe using a few different doses of a medication. So when you get to phase 3, you already have some data, and it could be in several hundred people. So the phase 3 trial that are these large trials tend to be not, it's not like no one's ever taken the medication before. And then there's even what we call phase 4 studies, where the drug's approved, but they're looking at it in a different way. An example, some of you might be aware, there's a trial looking at using Benlysta in early lupus. So right now, that's not kind of how we use it. We usually give this medication, then another medication, then another, and then we say, okay, well, I think we need maybe to try something like Benlysta. So now they're thinking, well, if we treat it as soon as we make the diagnosis, as we've learned from rheumatoid arthritis, don't wait, then we might be able to prevent damage on down the line. It took us like 30 years to figure out in rheumatoid arthritis that waiting to treat is bad. So now we know that, and we're trying to apply it to other diseases.
Yes, thank you for
But
talking
that
about.
drug's already approved, so going
Right.
into that trial, you don't feel like the safety should be an issue. It's just, trying to look at the effect of the drug in this situation.
Yes, so thank you for talking about the different types of clinical trials, because that was my next question. So you did talk about the phases. Dr. Worth, you want to explain a little bit more about clinical trials, the differences?
Well, I think one of the questions was how do you know if the treatment works? And they're very well defined outcomes that are acceptable to the FDA, and they have to be decided ahead of time. And so that's part of the reason why they want to make sure that, for instance, if you're doing a trial on one aspect of lupus, that people have enough of that disease that they can actually see a difference. And so that really is how you decide if something's working or not working. And there's actually a lot of studies now trying to improve on the way we measure lupus. So that's still an ongoing issue. But these different phases are very, they start out very small just to look at safety. And then usually the phase 2s are where you really get a sense of, is this going to work or not? It may not be as long a trial as a phase 3, but you can get a really good sort of heads up. There's something happening with this drug, it's working in some way. And then you can go on to a phase 3 trial where it's a much bigger global trial and sometimes harder because you need many more patients and you have to go to many more sites, and maybe some sites are not working as well as others. So it's a little more complicated with a phase 3. And then the other thing is that there are a lot of novel designs of trials that are being tried, and trying to get around some of the early issues. For instance, maybe using different subsets of lupus in the same trial to see, well, this subset works, this one doesn't. And then they can decide how to design their next phase of the trial. So there's a lot of that kind of work going on, as well as trying to say, let's try this drug in the trial. If it doesn't work, then maybe we'll switch to a different drug, all within the same trial, and try to learn as much as we can about what works and what doesn't.
I would also like to add that Dr. Worth is one of the pioneers to assess skin disease in lupus, so we're grateful for that.
So folks have also asked if they participate in a clinical trial, will they be compensated? If so, what does that compensation mean? So we'll stop there. Nikki, you want to start us off with that one?
Yes. So it really depends what the clinical trial entails. I think the longer the clinical trial is, the more they have to compensate you, and it could be in installment of payments. I've gotten, even just recently, I gave 14 tubes of blood, and I got $250 from a plasma place that's focusing on plasma and blood to do research. So it kind of just depends. If you're just answering some questions, which yes, answering questions can count as a clinical trial. That's what they call it. That might be $25. So I would definitely say that it ranges for sure.
What about a longer study, like if you were involved in a phase 1, 2, or 3 trial?
Yeah, I mean, the price is sort of dictated by the FDA. They don't want to make it so lucrative that you're sort of kind of pulling people into trials. So there's strict rules. And often the sponsoring company for the trial will have that information, like how much you would get paid. You're not gonna get rich on it, but it does compensate you for your time. Sometimes they might even assist with travel, and, you know, for some of these extra things, they would just make sure it's taken care of. So you're not like losing money by helping out.
Sometimes they also come to your house, especially if it's like blood work, like they're trying to, trust me, if you're willing to participate, they will jump through hoops. What he was saying about the transportation, they asked me if I needed transportation to the facility. So it really depends. And obviously if it's, you know, it's not feasible for you, then you can't do it. So.
Thank you. Will there be out-of-pocket expenses, especially if, saying you had like an adverse reaction, and had to go to the hospital or, you know, something like that? How does, you know, taking your medications or having to pay for additional medication, work with the clinical trial?
So usually the